The War Council chamber reeked of confidence and recycled air. Commander Vrell'tok stood at the head of the obsidian table, all 7 of his eyes gleaming with what I can only describe as smug anticipation. His scales rippled in that particular shade of purple that meant he thought he'd already won. Spoiler alert, he hadn't. Behold! Vrell'tok announced, his voice booming through the speakers embedded in the walls. The quantum disintegration matrix. A holographic projection materialized above the table. Spinning slowly, menacingly, the device looked like someone had crossbred a spider with a lightning storm and given it a really bad attitude. Energy crackled along its 17 primary coils. The mere sight of it had caused 3 junior officers to faint during the initial briefing. That I was not impressed. Well, okay, I was a little impressed. But mostly I was tired. 17 cycles of this war had worn everyone down to their last nerve. The humans had proven to be problematic. Every time we thought we'd cornered them, they'd pull some ridiculous maneuver that defied basic military doctrine. Last month, they'd defeated our primary battle fleet using what their commander called aggressive negotiations, and what I called ramming 17 cargo freighters into our flagship while playing something called heavy metal music. The Matrix will destabilize molecular bonds at the quantum level, Vrell'tok continued, clearly enjoying himself. Complete atomic dissolution within a 300-kilometer radius. No shields can stop it. No armor can withstand it. The humans will finally understand the futility of resistance. The assembled officers chittered and clicked their approval. I remained silent, my antennae twitching with something between dread and exhaustion. Deploy it immediately, Vrell'tok commanded. Target their diplomatic vessel. Once they witness this power, they will have no choice but to surrender. 3 hours later, we were in position. The human ship, a modest cruiser called the Defiant Spirit, floated serenely in neutral space. They'd agreed to this meeting, probably expecting another round of pointless negotiations. Instead, they were about to see the most devastating weapon our civilization had ever created. Quantum matrix charged and ready, the weapons officer reported. Open a channel, Vrell'tok ordered. I want them to see what's coming. The view screen flickered to life. A human appeared, looking remarkably casual for someone about to witness their doom. Captain Marcus Webb, according to our intelligence files. Mid-40s, graying hair, eyes that suggested he'd seen far too much and found most of it mildly annoying. Good afternoon, Commander, Webb said, taking a sip from a steaming cup. Coffee, probably. Humans were obsessed with the stuff. Captain Webb, Vrell'tok began, his voice dripping with theatrical menace. You are about to witness the ultimate expression of our technological superiority. The weapon we are targeting you with represents the pinnacle of destructive capability. Molecular bonds dissolved at the quantum level. Instantaneous, complete, irreversible annihilation. Surrender now, or face obliteration. Webb stared at the holographic display of our weapon that we'd helpfully transmitted to his ship. His expression didn't change. He took another sip of coffee, then he yawned, actually yawned that I watched in disbelief as this human, facing certain death, covered his mouth politely and yawned like he was sitting through a boring lecture about trade regulations. Sorry, Webb said, not sounding sorry at all. Long day. Anyway, that thing you're threatening us with? Yeah, we banned those in 1997. The council chamber went silent. Even the life support system seemed to pause. You, what? Vrell'tok's scales had gone from purple to a confused shade of gray. The Ottawa Treaty, Webb explained, gesturing with his coffee cup. Well, technically that was landmines, but we had a whole bunch of international conventions around that time. Geneva, Hague, the Biological Weapons Convention. Good times. Very productive decades for military ethics. He leaned forward, squinting at our weapon display. Your quantum disintegration matrix there? We called them quantum cascade dissolvers. Built about 40 of them back in the 90s. Field tested too. Then we looked at what they did and collectively decided, nope, too horrific, let's never do that again. Impossible, Vrell'tok sputtered. This technology is brand new. Our finest scientists spent decades developing it. Webb shrugged. Hey, no judgment. We all go through our weapon of mass destruction phase. You should see what we did with nuclear bombs back in the 40s and 50s. Built enough to blow up the planet 12 times over. Teenagers, right? So emotional. My brain was struggling to process this information. They'd had this technology. Weapons that could cause this level of destruction. And they'd just stopped using them? You're bluffing, Vrell'tok said, though his voice had lost its confidence. Am I? Webb set down his coffee cup and pulled up his own holographic display. Here's the decommissioning records. Here's the treaty documentation. Oh, and here's a fun video from 1998 of us melting down the last operational unit. There was cake afterward. Yellow cake, actually, which in hindsight was probably in poor taste given the uranium joke potential, but the sentiment was genuine. The evidence was irrefutable. Detailed schematics. Safety protocols. International agreements signed by every major human government. They'd created something terrible, recognized its horror, and chosen to abandon it. Vrell'tok's scales had turned completely white. Fire the weapon, he whispered. Sir? The weapons officer looked panicked. Fire it. The quantum matrix activated with a sound like reality screaming, and then it just stopped. Yeah, about that, Webb said casually. We also developed countermeasures before we banned them. The silence in our command chamber was the kind that makes you reconsider every life choice that led you to this exact moment. The quantum matrix, our ultimate weapon, our guarantee of victory, hung dead in space like a very expensive paperweight. Countermeasures, Vrell'tok repeated slowly, as if saying the word carefully might change its meaning. His scales had achieved a color I didn't know was biologically possible, something between shame purple and existential crisis blue. Phase conjugate quantum dampeners, Webb explained, still holding that infernal coffee cup. Pretty straightforward, really. We figured if we were building reality-melting weapons, we should probably also figure out how to stop them. You know, just in case someone got ideas. He paused. Or in case we got ideas. Humans are not always great at impulse control. This is absurd. Vrell'tok slammed 3 of his appendages on the table. You expect me to believe your species created and abandoned weapons technology that we are only now achieving? Webb tilted his head. Commander, we split the atom in 1945. We cloned a sheep in 1996. We invented the internet and immediately used it to argue about cats. We're a weird species. We build terrible things, feel bad about it, and then spend decades trying to unbuild them. He leaned back in his chair. Sometimes we even succeed. I couldn't stay quiet anymore. Captain Webb, why are you telling us this? You could have simply destroyed our weapon and maintained strategic ambiguity. Webb looked directly at me, and I felt the weight of something I couldn't quite name. Because, officer whose name I don't know, we've been where you are. Desperate. Scared. Convinced that the biggest weapon wins the war. He set his coffee down with deliberate care. It doesn't. It just makes the rubble bounce higher. Philosophical nonsense, Vrell'tok spat, but his conviction was crumbling like wet sand. Is it? Webb pulled up another display. Let me tell you about World War II. We killed between 70 and 85 million people. Then we looked at what we'd done and said never again. Built the United Nations. Established war crime tribunals. Created international law. He smiled, but it wasn't a happy expression. Then we immediately started the Cold War and built enough weapons to exterminate all life on Earth. 40 years of that stupidity before we finally started talking to each other like adults. The display shifted, showing images I'd seen in historical databases. Human cities reduced to atomic shadows. Mushroom clouds rising over islands. Children running from chemical fires. "We know what you're going through," Webb continued quietly. "The fear that drives you to build bigger guns. The certainty that overwhelming force equals security. We lived that nightmare for decades." He stood up now, and despite the viewscreen separation, his presence filled our chamber. "But here's what we learned, Commander. There's no weapon so powerful that it makes you safe. There's only the choice to stop fighting and start talking." "Pretty words from the winning side," I said, surprising myself. "Winning?" Webb laughed, but it was bitter. "Officer, we're not winning. We're surviving. There's a difference. Every battle we fight costs us people we can't replace. Every ship we lose took years to build. We're exhausted. You're exhausted. This whole stupid war is exhausting." He pointed at something off-screen. "My chief engineer is 23 years old. 23. She should be figuring out who she is, not calculating firing solutions. My doctor hasn't slept more than 4 hours in 6 months. My navigator writes letters home that might never arrive. We're all broken here." Vrell'tok had gone very still. "What are you proposing?" "A ceasefire. Negotiations. Actual negotiations, not the performance art we've been doing." Webb's voice carried a weight that 17 cycles of war had beaten into it. "We share the quantum dampener technology. You stand down your matrix. We both go home and try to remember what peace feels like." "And if we refuse?" Vrell'tok asked, but there was no threat in it anymore. Just tired curiosity. "Then we keep fighting," Webb said simply. "We'll win eventually, probably. But it'll cost both of us more than any victory is worth. I'll lose more crew. You'll lose more ships. We'll both lose years we can't get back." He picked up his coffee again, grimaced at the temperature, set it back down. "Or we could just stop. Revolutionary concept, I know." I watched Vrell'tok, saw the calculations running behind his eyes. Pride versus pragmatism. Honor versus survival. The weight of 17 cycles of failure pressing down on scales that could barely hold their color anymore. "The council will need to convene," he said finally. "Take your time," Webb replied. "We've got nowhere urgent to be. Though if you could decide before my coffee gets completely cold, I'd appreciate it. This is the good stuff, imported from somewhere called Colombia. Apparently they take it very seriously there." Vrell'tok terminated the connection. The chamber erupted in frantic discussion. Arguments bounced between the walls like trapped radiation. But I noticed something interesting. Nobody was arguing for continuing the war. They were arguing about how to stop it without losing too much face that we'd come here to demonstrate ultimate power. Instead, we'd been shown something more powerful than any weapon. The simple, radical choice to put the gun down first. 3 hours later, we transmitted our acceptance. The war ended not with a bang, but with a yawn and a coffee cup and a human who remembered that terrible weapons make terrible victories. Turns out, the scariest thing about humans isn't what they're willing to build. It's what they're willing to walk away from, and they'll lecture you about it the entire time.